Franzik. I am a retired professor of political science in the U.S. Naval Academy.
Hi, I'm Diana Owen. I'm a political science professor at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
Welcome and congratulations to you. My name is Tom Tinder and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
And will you introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon, judges. My name is Brianna Salas. Outside of We the People, I have been in ROTC for 4 years and I've been the Special Projects Officer for 2 years in a row out of school.
Hello, judges. My name is Laura Ann Moore, and in addition to We the People, I am a competitive equestrian, and next year I will be attending the University of the South in Tennessee.
Hello, judges. Good day. I am Christian Schmenk, and after high school, I intend on studying political science and literature at Howard University.
And is your teacher here with us?
Yes, sorry. We're here with our teacher, Milton Himes, and our coaches, Amy Henderson Seitz and Michaela Tonking.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you know, we're in Unit 6. We're doing question number 2, which I will read you. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, quote, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." End quote. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements did the founders have about the standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence? You may begin.
In President Eisenhower's farewell address, he declares, "We must never let the weight of the combination of military and industry endanger our liberties or democratic process." We agree with Eisenhower's assessment of military power and his warning against unwarranted influence with the military-industrial complex because it has and continues to give industrial contractors more influence in Congress than the people themselves, removing our popular sovereignty.
The military-industrial complex is the use of industrial resources to develop the economy through military spending. To understand how the military-industrial complex creates unwarranted influence, we can look to Gordon Adams' concept of the Iron Triangle, a three-way alliance between legislators in Congress, bureaucrats, and interest groups.
For instance, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has been on the board of Raytheon Technologies since 2016, which is the third largest military defense contractor in the country. This demonstrates a dangerous relationship of power between representatives and industrial entities that don't serve the common good, but rather the private interest of the US's emphasis on defense.
The Federalist and Anti-Federalist founders disagreed over whether the new nation should have a standing army. Because the British were quartered in colonist homes during the Revolutionary War, many Americans were wary of these standing armies. Anti-Federalists believed that having a standing army would endanger the liberties of the people. Brutus 10 warns that an army will subvert the forms of government to establish a new one, according to the pleasure of the leader.
On the contrary, the Federalists were concerned of the ongoing threat of the large British army. They believed that having a standing army would protect the people and that it was fundamental to the national defense. Federalist 24 argues for an army run by the legislative branch instead of the executive, saying that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2, which prevents Congress from spending money on an army for longer than 2 years, will be a great and real security against the keeping up of troops without evident necessity.
Today's disagreements over our large military budget reflect the founders' disagreements over the standing army. Additionally, both the Federalists and Anti-Federalists were concerned by presidential power over the military. The founders' arguments are relevant today because of the rise of presidential war power, from FDR's expansion of executive orders, to Truman's seizure of steel mills, and to George Bush using the unitary presidential theory in the recent war on terror.
At this point in our military development, there still needs to be an international military presence to protect our allies and our economic interests. The U.S. should scale back our international spending rather than our international presence.
The expansion of our military presence can date back to the Spanish-American War, where the U.S. violated the Monroe Doctrine by taking the Philippines. Post-World War II, the Truman Doctrine and NSC 68 drastically increased military spending, stating that the U.S. would provide international aid for communist-threatened countries.
The U.S. should prioritize security over economic interests when it comes to our military presence. George Washington declared, "To be prepared for war is one of the most effective means of preserving peace." Thus, we should maintain good relations with our allies and utilize our forward bases.
However, we should cut back our spending to use internally. Head of the National Guard Bureau, General Joseph Langle, suggests that if the Guard and Reserve grew in numbers with corresponding cuts to the active duty forces, the U.S. can save $30 billion each year.
In a speech to NATO, former President Eisenhower declared, "The problem in defense is how far you can go without destroying from within what you're trying to defend from without." Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a few follow-up questions, as you might guess. Should the government require all citizens to register for the Selective Service? Why or why not?
I disagree.
I would argue that yes, that having requiring citizens to participate in service would be very effective. According to political scientist William Galston, this would increase civic engagement. And we can see that in countries like France, where the president is also making a push towards this compulsory service in the military.
I would disagree. In the German constitution, it states no person shall be compelled against his conscience to render military service in the involving of arms. And I think that should carry over here, as civic engagement and civil service can be done in vastly different ways from the military.
You mentioned the National Guard in your presentation. Under what circumstances, if any, should the National Guard be deployed domestically?
The National Guard is a state militia in line with the anti-federalist views. However, to go to your point, the National Guard should be deployed in times of crisis where the common good is at stake, such as the case with hurricanes in the past decades like Katrina, and providing humanitarian relief and distributions of vaccines in our home state of Nevada.
Additionally, we can look at an instance where the National Guard was deployed that I do not agree with was in Portland during the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer. I believe that we should use the concepts of federalism first. So we should use the local government first to help control these protests and then move to the National Guard if the state cannot handle it themselves. And I don't think that those first levels were met before the National Guard was called into these protests.
You mentioned about the Iron Triangle, and you gave the example of Secretary Austin and his situation. What should be done about, what do you propose should be done about those situations where you have military leaders involved with the industrial complex?
So one example of something that can be done is convicting House members who participate unjustly in the military-industrial complex. So for example, in 1987, the WedTech scandal the WedTech company was a military defense contractor that used bribery to get approval of different congressmen, and 2 members of the House were impeached and actually put in prison because of this. And I think that this is one way that we can limit our collusion, I guess, with the military-industrial complex, is holding the people accountable that continue to perpetuate it.
To reinforce that point, in a personal interview with former Secretary of the Air Force, Barbara Barrett, she declared that if we are too liable to get too close in relations to these military-industrial contractors, that we will be liable to actually enslave ourselves to a contractor and no longer have that seat of power that we justly have, which shows another potential ramification of not taking action, as my colleague mentioned.
And another solution I propose for this is that with the case of lobbying, I would say that adding full transparency to this would be a great solution. We could have the Library of Congress create a de facto forum online where all of transactions are available to every citizen, and this solves the issue of transparency.
Let me ask a broader question related to unit number 6, and that is that legislation to make election laws stricter has been proposed in a number of states. Why do you suppose that is a matter of discussion now? And what do you think? Is it a good idea or a bad idea?
To go to your second point, I do believe it's a very bad idea, especially with the lobbying that my colleague just mentioned, because the cases of Citizens United and Buckley v. Vallejo give corporations First Amendment rights and protections to participate in elections. And there's also a removed amount of campaign funding, which also is solved in the proposed For the People Act, which is currently in the Senate, that proposes a broader election security, transparency, as my colleague mentioned prior, and also keeps our public domain of voting free to ensure popular sovereignty.
Additionally, in your regards of voter restrictions, the rise in voter ID laws is something that has been a hot topic in recent years. And I think that, again, this For the People Act, which is currently in the Senate, it addresses voter ID laws as well as voter fraud, which is the reason why these were instated in the first place. And I think that if this passes, which it looks like it might not, but if this does, it would be a great way to remedy this problem of voter suppression.
So you quoted President Eisenhower at several points in your presentation. And as a military man, I wonder if you could elaborate on what might have been the basis of his concerns about the military-industrial complex.
We can look to him actually serving as a general and bearing witness to the industrial explosion and ballooning and during World War II, where a lot of materials were reserved for manufacturing of arms, such as we can talk about rosy riveters and just the massive industrialization and allocation of resource to this. And he saw that military and expansion is a very heavy industrial entity and has the opportunity to vastly boost an economy.
Let me ask this. You said that security should be more important over economic issues as it relates to the military and so forth. Where does the humanitarian interests of the United States fit into this equation?
So the U.S. currently participates and gives out $47 billion in foreign aid to countries around the world, but actually 57% of these funds are designated military funds, which shows that even with our foreign aid, it still goes back into their military on top of the presence we already have established in these countries.
Additionally, we are a part of the United Nations as well as NATO, and our treaties really hold us accountable to these humanitarian efforts. So, for example, just yesterday, the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, called on the U.S. to help Ukraine fight the war against Russia. And this is one way that the U.S. helps other countries is through our own military.
Your generation tends to participate in politics less than previous generations or older generations. What do you think can or should be done about that?
Certainly a solution I would propose to this is only right now, currently 9 out of 50 states require a full year of government or civics course to graduate. And I would think instilling a education class, a civics course like We the People that we are currently in, that would help citizens be more educated and perform critical thinking and realize the importance of like government in our society and how it affects our day-to-day lives.
Any downsides to more participation?
I'd argue that there wouldn't be. In fact, the more we actually get the young generation to engage and understand politics, the better. In an article written by former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, inviting kids into the democratic process, especially court proceedings, can be very beneficial for them to actually gain a grasp around how these systems actually fundamentally work. And expanding a more educated populace to a popular sovereignty is furthermore a great idea, as former President Dwight D. Eisenhower said in the very speech that we quoted. A well-informed citizenry is one of these safeguards against a lot of these military-industrial complexes that can be remedied through education.
And additionally, we could even look past in the past to Plato's ideas of philosopher kings, where he says that every citizen should be educated as a leader, as these philosopher kings, and have the morals and the education to be able to elect their representatives as they did in those days.
You mentioned the notion of an informed citizenry. Given the status of the media today, do you think that we have an informed citizenry in the United States? And if not, what steps might be taken to remedy that?
Well, I don't think everyone is informed. I do think that social media, not necessarily traditional media, but for my generation, it's social media, definitely helps people become more informed. So for example, in 2018, after the Parkland, Florida school shooting, there was a massive movement on Twitter from students that were just like us to help push for gun reform. And this was just one way that social media helped inform my generation of issues that affect our lives.
I'd
And
like to
I would actually like to disagree with my colleague. According to Robert Putnam's theory of bowling alone, we have had a decrease in social capital in the last 70 years. And we could also, this could be due to social media, because social media has also increased social anxiety, which prevents us from having civil discourse and being able to properly talk about our ideas and our moderate thoughts instead of having these radical thoughts be the louder voice.
Well, thank you very much. You did an excellent job. I didn't think I would hear in the same presentation quotations from the German Constitution, Senator Dale O'Connor, and the Federalist Papers. I thought that you did a good job of bringing in lots of good information. You brought in the Iron Triangle and had an understanding of that. There are a number of areas I would have liked to talk to you more about, because you've got some interesting perspectives on things. I want you to think a little bit about the fact that you're in a very rarefied atmosphere, and being in the national finals here, particularly Unit 6, which talks about political involvement. You're part of that educated mass out there. And if we look historically, small groups of people who are well informed have moved our country forward. So we have great expectations for you.
I'd like to agree with my colleague that I felt that you did an excellent job. Your prepared remarks were, they were filled with all sorts of information. You touched on the Constitution, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist debates. One of the things that I really enjoyed about your presentation and felt kind of made it stand out is, as a political scientist, I think it's always important to define your terms. And you did that. Every time you raise something like an iron triangle, you would define what that was. Just throughout, you would define what your terms were before you went on to talk about your position or to give some historical examples that relate to it. And to me, that's something graduate students don't do. And you did a wonderful job of that throughout. I also, as a political scientist, appreciate the fact that you were citing some of our, most prominent literature, Bill Galston on civic engagement, and Bob Putnam in Bowling Alone, really knew the literature and understood it at a deep level. So I was really impressed by that. Like the way that you were able to cite specifics about the amount of aid, for example, or the amount of spending that was involved with particular aspects of your of the discussion. So just really very, very strong performance. Great job.
I echo all of my colleagues' comments, and I think you really have an understanding of what the We the People program is. It's supposed to be a congressional hearing, and you all are the experts that are coming to provide testimony in front of the congressional panel, and you certainly have tons of expertise and opinions and proposals that are backed up with solid reasoning and wise comments. I want to say, first of all, that you were very clear, and sometimes that doesn't occur, but you were very clear in what your positions were, what your agreements and disagreements were, and the various sides of the issues that you talked about, and you backed it up with a tremendous amount of research that you've done, facts and information. I just commend you on the clarity of your entire presentation, from the 4-minute opening remarks to the question and answer period. And you left us, I had 3 or 4 things that I wanted to follow up on and get your ideas. You know, you say contractors have more influence than citizens. And I agree with you completely. And how do we go about changing that perspective and increase the National Guard and reduce the military? I agree with that. I want to know what your proposals would be to do that. I just thought you did a very good job. And I think that the thing that comes home to me most is what this, again, We the People program is all about. Because, you know, you're talking about the founding fathers and you're quoting Plato from centuries and centuries ago. And then you make a comment about something that happened yesterday. And it shows that all of the work and the research and the participation that you've been involved in has relevance today. And let me just conclude by saying that you told us what you're planning on doing, or what you are doing in your leadership positions in school now. And you have such a tremendous amount of knowledge and leaderships, and you are definitely good citizens. And please continue that into the future, because we need to have involvement and participation by young people like you, because you are truly the future leaders of your local community, your state, and our nation. Thank you very much. Congratulations and the best of luck to you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
all,
judges,
judges.
for having
Thank you
today.
so much for your time today. Thank you.